She placed trembling hands on her swollen belly, feeling the twins kick as gunshots echoed through the marble halls. The same hands that once soothed him were now the only thing standing between their children and the monster he'd become to protect them. Thessaly Wright never imagined her life would end in bloodshed when she agreed to marry Corvino Stellato, the enigmatic don of the most feared Italian crime family. At 47, she thought she'd left behind dreams of family and passion, accepting this arrangement as a strategic alliance between American and Italian interests. But 6 months into their marriage, 2 pink lines changed everything. Twins, the doctor said, a miracle at her age. Now, 8 months pregnant and hunted by rival families who see her unborn children. As threats to the power balance, Thessaly realizes the man she married is vanishing. Corvino, 49 and hardened by decades of calculated violence, is transforming into something far more terrifying than the controlled Don she knew. His eyes have grown colder, his methods more savage, his mercy non-existent. Bodies pile up in his wake as he eliminates anyone who dares threaten his family. Thessaly fears not just for her life, but for the souls of her children, and whether the man protecting them is the same one who might ultimately destroy them all. If you're ready to hear the entire story, every twist, every heart-stopping moment, every secret revealed, hit that subscribe button right now. And here's the thing. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, because tomorrow I'm bringing you another story that's just as wild, just as unbelievable as this one. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Chapter 1. 6 months earlier, the contract had been simpler than Thessaly Wright expected. 2 signatures, a handshake that lasted precisely 3 seconds, and a marriage that meant everything to their respective organizations, but nothing to the 2 people binding themselves together. She'd worn ivory, not white, a deliberate choice that acknowledged the pragmatism of the arrangement. Corvino had worn black because he always wore black. The ceremony took place in the private chapel of the Stellato estate, a sprawling fortress disguised as a villa in the hills outside Naples. Thessaly counted 47 guests, all men, all watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation. She was the first American woman to marry into the Stellato bloodline in 3 generations, a strategic bridge between Corvino's Italian operations and the lucrative East Coast territories her late father's consulting firm had helped facilitate for decades. "You don't have to be nervous," Corvino had told her before they walked down the aisle, his English flawless despite the accent that rounded his consonants. "This is business. I expect nothing from you except discretion and presence when required." She'd appreciated his honesty, even as it stung in ways she hadn't anticipated. At 47, Thessaly had long abandoned romantic notions, but the clinical nature of his words reminded her exactly what she was: a transaction, an alliance sealed in silk and signatures rather than affection. The first month, they barely spoke. Corvino maintained a separate wing of the estate, conducting his business behind closed doors while Thessaly navigated the complex social dynamics of being a Don's wife. She learned quickly that silence was currency in this world, that observing revealed more than asking questions ever could. The wives of his capos, his lieutenants, watched her constantly, measuring whether she would be an asset or liability to their carefully constructed hierarchy. But somewhere in the second month, things shifted. Thessaly found Corvino in the library at 3 in the morning, reading Dante in the original Italian. She'd come down for tea, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, and discovered him in his reading glasses, a vulnerability she hadn't expected from a man whose reputation involved bodies disappearing into the Mediterranean. "You read?" he'd asked, gesturing to the English translation she'd been working through. "I'm trying to understand this place," she'd replied honestly. He'd poured her whiskey instead of tea, and they'd talked until sunrise about poetry, about the weight of inherited legacies, about the strange loneliness of leading organizations built on blood and loyalty. It wasn't romance. It was recognition. 2 people trapped in roles they'd been born or married into, making the best of circumstances neither had chosen. After that night, they began having dinner together twice a week. Corvino showed her the estate's gardens, explained the history of his family's rise to power, listened when she talked. about her father's empire and the consulting work that had really been money laundering dressed in expensive suits. He never touched her beyond the occasional formal hand at her elbow. Never suggested their arrangement should become anything more intimate. Yet Thessaly caught herself noticing things. The way his jaw tightened when he was controlling his temper during business calls, how he personally tended to the lemon trees his mother had planted before her death, the almost imperceptible softening of his expression when he looked at her across the dinner table, as if surprised to find her still there. By month 4, they'd developed an unexpected partnership. Thessaly's background in financial consulting proved invaluable. She could see patterns in his business operations that even his consigliere missed. Corvino began asking her opinion on deals, on territorial negotiations, on the delicate balance of power that kept his family dominant. She became more than decorative, she became useful. "You're good at this," he'd said one evening, reviewing her analysis of a potential alliance with a Russian syndicate. "Better than most of my men." "Is that a compliment or an insult to your organization?" she'd teased, and his rare smile had transformed his severe features into something almost warm. The night before she discovered her pregnancy, they'd shared wine on the terrace overlooking the valley. Corvino had been unusually relaxed, the tension that normally held his shoulders rigid finally easing. He'd told her about the weight of being Dawn, about the impossible task of protecting an empire while knowing any moment of weakness could trigger war. "Do you regret this arrangement?" Thessaly had asked quietly. He'd looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "No, you're—" He'd paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Unexpected. In the best way. It wasn't love, but it was something, a foundation being built one careful conversation at a time, respect evolving into something that resembled companionship." Thessaly had gone to bed that night thinking perhaps this marriage wouldn't just be endurable. Perhaps it might become something good. She had no idea how drastically everything was about to change. Chapter 2. The pregnancy test sat on the bathroom counter like an accusation. 2 pink lines, impossibly bright against the white plastic. Thessaly stared at it for 10 minutes, her hands gripping the marble sink until her knuckles went white. At 47, she'd assumed this door had closed years ago. Her doctor had told her the chances were minimal, that perimenopause had likely already begun. Yet here was the evidence, undeniable and terrifying. She'd been feeling off for weeks, exhaustion that coffee couldn't touch, nausea that struck randomly, a strange tenderness in her breasts. She'd attributed it to stress, to adjusting to her new life in Italy. The possibility of pregnancy hadn't even occurred to her until she'd missed her second period. The night on the terrace had led to their first kiss, tentative and searching. Then to his bedroom, where 6 months of careful distance had finally collapsed into need. It had happened twice more over the following weeks, not passion exactly, but something deeper, a connection that felt inevitable once they'd finally allowed it. Now this. Thessaly found Corvino in his study, reviewing shipping manifests with his underboss, a brutal man named Drago, whose eyes were always calculating. She waited until Drago left, noting the way the second-in-command's gaze lingered on her slightly longer than appropriate. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Corvino looked up from his paperwork, immediately reading the tension in her posture. He dismissed the 2 guards stationed inside the door with a gesture. When they were alone, he stood, moving around the desk with the predatory grace that reminded her exactly what kind of man she'd married. "What's wrong?" His hand went automatically to the gun at his waist, always anticipating threat. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Thessaly watched emotions flicker across Corvino's face too quickly to identify. Shock, certainly, but also something that looked almost like wonder before his expression locked down into its usual controlled mask. "You're certain?" His voice was careful. 3 tests. All positive. I'll call a doctor to confirm, but yes. Corvino sat down slowly, processing. Thessaly remained standing, giving him space, unsure what reaction to expect. In their 6 months of marriage, she'd learned he was a man who controlled everything. His emotions, his empire, his reputation. This was beyond his control. "This changes everything," he finally said. I know. If you want me to, she began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. Don't. Don't even finish that sentence. His eyes met hers, fierce and suddenly protective. This is my child. Our child. Nothing happens to this child. The intensity in his voice surprised her. Corvino stood again, crossing to her, his hands framing her face with unexpected gentleness. You're sure you want this? At our age, there are risks. I stopped wanting things a long time ago, Thessaly admitted. But this? I didn't know I could still have this. I won't give it up. Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. Then we do this. Together. That evening, Corvino insisted on accompanying her to a private doctor he trusted. The man was discreet, accustomed to treating the families without asking questions. He confirmed the pregnancy, then dropped the second bomb. Twins, he said, pointing to the ultrasound screen where two tiny blips pulsed with life. Both have strong heartbeats. Congratulations. Thessaly felt Corvino's hand tighten around hers. She turned to see him staring at the screen with an expression she'd never witnessed, awe mixed with something almost vulnerable. When they left the clinic, his hand remained at the small of her back, protective and possessive. The announcement to the family happened 3 days later. Corvino gathered his capos, his consigliere, and the key members of his organization in the estate's formal dining room. Thessaly stood beside him as he made the declaration. My wife is carrying twins, my heirs. Anyone who threatens them answers to me directly. The men congratulated him, but Thessaly noticed the undercurrents. Drago's smile didn't reach his eyes. Two of the younger capos exchanged glances that made her uneasy. She'd been in this world long enough to recognize calculation when she saw it. That night, as she prepared for bed, Thessaly found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single card with 4 words written in elegant script, "They're coming for you." No signature, no indication of who they were. She showed it to Corvino immediately. He examined the paper with cold fury, then made a single phone call. Within an hour, the estate's security doubled. Who would threaten me? Thessaly asked, though she already suspected. Anyone who sees my heirs as a threat to the power balance, Corvino said flatly. Rival families who've been waiting for weakness. Internal enemies who preferred when I had no direct successors. His jaw tightened. It doesn't matter. I'll eliminate them all if necessary. It was the first time Thessaly heard the promise that would eventually become his downfall. She didn't realize then that protecting her would transform him into something far more dangerous than the controlled Don she'd married. She only knew that as she placed her hand on her still flat belly, feeling the weight of Corvino's arm around her shoulders. The fragile peace they'd built was already shattering. Chapter 3. The dinner was meant to be diplomatic, a carefully orchestrated gathering to present Thessaly formally to the allied families as the mother of Corvino's heirs. Representatives from 4 organizations attended, each bringing expensive gifts and calculated smiles. The dining room gleamed with crystal and candlelight, a civilized veneer over the violence that funded such opulence. Thessaly wore emerald silk that accommodated her slightly swelling belly, now 3 months along. The twins were growing strong, according to her doctor, though morning sickness had become all-day sickness that she hid behind practiced smiles. Corvino stayed close throughout the evening, his hand occasionally brushing her arm or back, small gestures that signaled possession and protection to everyone watching. She was making conversation with the wife of a Calabrian boss when the first shot shattered the window. Everything happened in fragments, glass exploding inward. Thessaly being slammed to the floor, Corvino's body covering hers as bullets ripped through the air above them, screaming, the wet sound of bodies being hit. Then Corvino was up, moving with lethal precision, his gun appearing from beneath his jacket. From her position on the floor, Thessaly watched her husband transform. The controlled Don vanished, replaced by something primal and brutal. 3 men in black tactical gear burst through the shattered window. Corvino shot the first through the throat before he fully entered the room. The second attacker raised his weapon, but Corvino was faster, impossibly fast. He grabbed the man's gun arm, twisted until bone cracked audibly, then drove his knee into the attacker's face with devastating force. The man dropped, and Corvino stomped on his neck with cold efficiency. The third assassin made it 3 steps into the room before Corvino was on him. No gun this time. Corvino wanted this one alive. He moved like violence incarnate, each strike calculated for maximum damage. He broke the man's kneecap with a vicious kick, caught him as he fell, then systematically shattered his ribs with elbow strikes that made Thessaly's stomach turn. The attacker tried to fight back, managed to land one punch that split Corvino's lip. The Don smiled through the blood, smiled, and then unleashed fury. He grabbed the man by the throat and slammed him onto the dining table, scattering crystal glasses and fine china. His hands closed around the assassin's windpipe, squeezing with methodical pressure. "Who sent you?" Corvino's voice was quiet, conversational, while his hands slowly crushed the man's throat. The attacker gasped, clawing at Corvino's wrists. Corvino eased the pressure just enough for the man to breathe, then increased it again, a terrible rhythm of mercy and suffocation. "I asked you a question." "Russo. Family," the man choked out. Corvino's expression didn't change. He looked up, found Drago among the chaos of overturned furniture and frightened guests. "Call Antonio Russo. Tell him I'm coming for him tonight. Tell him I'm bringing pieces of his men." Then he snapped the assassin's neck with a single efficient twist. The silence that followed was absolute. Thessaly remained on the floor, her hands instinctively covering her belly. Her dress covered in dust and splattered with blood that wasn't hers. Corvino turned to her, his face spattered with red, his eyes burning with something inhuman. He crossed to her in 3 strides, dropping to his knees. His hands, those hands that had just killed 3 men, touched her face with devastating gentleness. "Are you hurt? The babies?" "I'm fine," she whispered, though she was shaking violently. "You're sure?" He was checking her for injuries, his blood-soaked hands running over her arms, her shoulders, her belly. "I'm sure." Something shifted in his expression. Relief mixed with rage so pure it made him terrifying. He stood, pulling her up with him, then addressed the room full of witnesses. "This is what happens to anyone who threatens my family. The Russos will be extinct by sunrise. Anyone else who even thinks about touching my wife or my children will follow." He turned to Drago. "Clear this room. Increase security to level 5. No one enters or leaves this estate without my personal authorization." Then, impossibly, his attention returned to Thessaly. He cupped her face in his bloodied hands, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I need to handle this. But first, I need to know you're truly safe." "Corvino," she started. "By any means necessary," he said, his voice dropping to something dark and absolute. "I will protect you and our children by any means necessary. There is nothing I won't do, no line I won't cross. Do you understand?" Thessaly looked into his eyes and saw the man she'd married burning away, leaving something molten and dangerous in his place. She should have been terrified. Part of her was, but another part, the part that felt her twins moving inside her, that understood. The stakes in this brutal world felt something else entirely. Gratitude. "I understand," she whispered. He kissed her forehead, leaving a smear of blood against her skin, then walked out into the night to wage war. Thessaly stood in the destroyed dining room, surrounded by bodies and broken glass, and placed both hands on her belly. She'd married a Don. Now she was watching him become something far worse. And God help her, she couldn't bring herself to stop him. Chapter 4. The screaming started at 3 a.m. Thessaly woke to the sound echoing through the estate's stone walls, raw, animal sounds of agony that made her blood run cold. She'd been home from the hospital for 2 days. The twins checked and rechecked after the attack. The doctors had assured her they were fine, but Corvino had insisted on complete bed rest regardless. Now she sat up in the massive bed, listening to someone being systematically destroyed somewhere in the depths of the villa. She should have stayed in her room, should have pulled the covers over her head and pretended ignorance, maintained the careful blindness that allowed wives in this world to survive. But Thessaly had spent 47 years refusing to look away from uncomfortable truths. She wasn't about to start now. She found them in the wine cellar. The space had been converted into something else entirely, a concrete room with a drain in the floor and tools arranged on a metal table with surgical precision. Two men hung from chains attached to the ceiling, their bodies already bearing evidence of hours of torture. Corvino stood between them, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, blood coating his forearms like gloves. He didn't notice her at first. He was focused entirely on the man in front of him, asking questions, in that same quiet conversational tone he'd used during the attack. When the man didn't answer quickly enough, Corvino picked up pliers from the table and went to work on his fingernails. Thessaly made an involuntary sound. Corvino's head snapped toward her, his expression shifting through shock, anger, and something almost like shame before settling into hard resolve. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly. "I heard the screaming." "Go back to bed, Thessaly." She didn't move. Couldn't. Her eyes tracked from the torture implements to the drain where blood pooled, to Drago, standing in the corner with a gun and an expression of professional detachment. "What are you doing? What's necessary?" Corvino's jaw tightened. "These are Russo soldiers. They planned the attack on you. They have information about who else might be involved." The man he'd been working on raised his battered head. "Please," he gasped. "I told you everything. You told me names. Now I need locations, assets, every piece of their operation." Corvino's voice remained level, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "You give me that, and I make it quick. You don't, and we continue." Thessaly's hand went automatically to her belly, now showing a small curve beneath her nightgown. The babies were safe because this man, her husband, was willing to become a monster. The logic was simple and terrible. If he hadn't reacted with overwhelming force, if he'd shown any weakness, more attacks would follow. In this world, mercy was interpreted as vulnerability. "How much longer?" she asked quietly. Corvino studied her face, perhaps looking for judgment or revulsion. "An hour, maybe 2. Will it work? Will it stop them from coming after us again? The Russo family will cease to exist by dawn. Anyone connected to them will receive pieces of their leaders as a message." His eyes held hers, challenging her to condemn him. "This is who I am. This is what I do to protect what's mine." Thessaly should have been horrified, should have seen the man she'd begun to care for vanishing beneath this brutal creature. But standing there, 4 months pregnant with twins in a world where she'd been, marked for death, she felt something twisted and dark bloom in her chest. Relief, gratitude, and shame at feeling both. "I'll be upstairs," she finally said. She turned to leave, but Corvino's voice stopped her. "Thessaly." When she looked back, his expression had softened marginally. "I'm sorry you had to see this. But I'm not sorry I'm doing it." "I know," she whispered. Upstairs, she couldn't sleep. The screaming continued for another 90 minutes before finally stopping. When Corvino came to her room near dawn, he'd showered and changed, all evidence of the night's work scrubbed away except for the darkness in his eyes. "It's done," he said simply. "All of them?" "The Russo leadership and anyone who knew about the attack. Their territories are being absorbed by families loyal to us. The message has been sent." Thessaly sat up against the headboard, studying him in the pre-dawn light. "Does it get easier? The things you have to do?" "No." He moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It never gets easier. You just get better at carrying it." She reached out, taking his hand, the same hand that had inflicted unspeakable pain just hours ago. "I'm grateful," she admitted, the words tasting like ash, "for what you did, for keeping us safe. That makes me complicit, doesn't it? You're my wife, the mother of my children. You're not responsible for the ugliness I commit in your name." But his hand tightened around hers. "Though knowing you don't condemn me for it, that matters more than it should." They sat in silence as morning light began filtering through the curtains. Thessaly felt something fundamental shifting inside her. The last remnants of the woman she'd been before this marriage burning away. She was learning the terrible truth about love in this world. It wasn't soft or pure. It was brutal and possessive, built on blood and sacrifice. "No more torture rooms," she said finally. "Not where I can hear it. I'll use the old barn on the southern property, and you tell me when it's necessary. No more surprises." Agreed. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. It was negotiation, finding a way to live with the monster she'd helped create by the simple act of existing, of carrying his children, of mattering to him enough that he'd burn the world to keep her safe. Corvino leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. I'll try not to become what I'm afraid I'm becoming. But you will if you have to, Thessaly finished. Yes. She pulled him down beside her, letting him hold her as the babies kicked against the wall of her belly. And she didn't say what they both knew, that every act of violence in her name bound them tighter together, wound them into something neither could escape. The protection she craved was costing them both their humanity, and she still couldn't bring herself to ask him to stop. Chapter 5. The estate became a prison dressed as a sanctuary. 2 weeks after the Russo elimination, Corvino implemented security protocols that effectively confined Thessaly to the villa grounds. 30 guards patrolled in rotating shifts. Every delivery was screened. Visitors required 48 hours advance clearance and electronic sweeps. The iron gates remained locked, surveillance cameras monitoring every angle. Thessaly understood the necessity. She even appreciated it during the first few days when exhaustion from her pregnancy made her content to rest. But by week 2, the walls seemed to shrink. By week 3, she felt suffocating under the weight of protection. I need to go into Naples, she told Corvino over breakfast one morning. The doctor's appointment. I've arranged for him to come here. I need fresh air, real air, not just garden walks. Too dangerous. He didn't even look up from the intelligence reports Drago had delivered. We're still identifying potential threats. Thessaly set down her espresso cup with more force than necessary. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I'm going insane locked in this compound. That got his attention. Corvino studied her across the table, his dark eyes assessing. 2 more weeks. We're close to eliminating the last of the Russo sympathizers. You said that a week ago. The situation evolved. Something in his tone made her pause. What aren't you telling me? Nothing you need to worry about. Corvino. She waited until he met her eyes. We agreed. No surprises. He was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. There's been chatter, suggestions that the Russo attack wasn't independent, that someone within our organization might have fed them information about the dinner. Thessaly's blood ran cold. A traitor? Possibly. We're investigating. Who's investigating? Drago? The name came out before she could stop it. Corvino's expression sharpened. Why would you question Drago? I don't know. Instinct? Thessaly tried to articulate the unease she'd felt since the announcement of her pregnancy. He looks at me strangely. At the twins, like what? Like they're a problem to be solved rather than your heirs to be protected. Corvino leaned back in his chair, processing this. Drago has been my underboss for 8 years. He's proven his loyalty repeatedly. I'm sure he has. I'm just telling you what I see. He nodded slowly. I'll keep it in mind. But until we know more, you stay here. Protected. Protected. The word echoed in Thessaly's mind long after Corvino left for meetings in Naples. Protected but also isolated, cut off from any real information about the threats apparently swirling around her. She decided to do her own investigating. The estate's security systems ran through a central office on the ground floor. Thessaly had access. Corvino had given her credentials shortly after their marriage. Back when she was just a consultant helping with legitimate business. She'd never used them, never needed to. Now she slipped into the office during the afternoon when most guards were conducting exterior patrols. The computer required a password. She tried several combinations before landing on the date they'd first slept together. It unlocked immediately, and Thessaly felt a pang of something bittersweet that even his security systems contained sentiment. She navigated to the intelligence files Corvino reviewed each morning. Most required clearances beyond her level, but she found archived reports accessible to anyone with basic credentials. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The attack on the dinner had been planned with extraordinary precision, exact knowledge of the security, rotation, the dinner's timing, even which window provided the clearest shot at where she'd be sitting. Information only someone with deep access to Corvino's operation could have provided. But more troubling were the reports from the past 3 months. A pattern emerged once Thessaly knew to look for it. Incidents that seemed like typical territorial conflicts, all shared a common thread. Each escalation had been triggered by intelligence provided through Drago's network. She dug deeper, pulling up financial records she probably shouldn't have been able to access. Drago's accounts showed legitimate income sources, but there were gaps, large sums moving in and out through circuitous routes that suggested shell companies or offshore holdings. Thessaly was so focused on the screen, she didn't hear footsteps until the door opened. Drago stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Stellato, I didn't expect to find you here." Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "Just checking on some financial reports. Corvino asked me to review quarterly earnings." It was a weak lie, and they both knew it. Drago's eyes flicked to the computer screen, taking in the intelligence files before Thessaly could minimize them. "Those aren't financial reports," he said quietly. "No," Thessaly admitted, deciding honesty might be safer than obvious deception. "I'm trying to understand who's threatening my children." Drago stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. The click of the lock made Thessaly's mouth go dry. "And what did you find?" he asked. "Nothing yet. Just questions." "Questions about me?" He moved closer, and Thessaly fought the urge to back away. At 6 months pregnant, she couldn't move quickly anyway. "Should I have questions about you?" Drago smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "You're clever. Corvino chose well, even if he doesn't fully appreciate what he has." He stopped a few feet away, close enough to be threatening but not overtly so. "But clever can be dangerous, especially for someone in your condition." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice. The Don is distracted lately, obsessed with protecting you and those babies. It makes him vulnerable, reckless, not thinking clearly about the organization's real interests." "His heirs aren't the organization's real interests?" "Heirs complicate things. Bloodline succession brings wars. Some of us believe the commission structure serves us better. Leadership by merit, not birth." Thessaly felt ice settle in her veins. "You're admitting you're behind the attacks." "I'm admitting nothing. I'm simply having a conversation with my Don's wife about organizational philosophy." Drago's hand rested casually on his hip, near his concealed weapon. "But hypothetically, if someone wanted to return the family to a more stable leadership model, they'd need to remove the complications carefully. Make it look like external threats. Corvino will kill you when he finds out." "Will he? Or will he be so consumed with grief he becomes ineffective, requiring the underboss to step in for the family's sake?" Drago shrugged. "Again, hypothetically. He'll never believe you. I'll tell him everything." "Will you? A woman he's known 6 months? Against a man who's served him 8 years? Drago smiled again. "And even if he does investigate me, how long will that take? Days? Weeks? What might happen to you and those babies while he's distracted, looking in the wrong direction?" Thessaly understood the game now. Tell Corvino and Drago would accelerate whatever plan he had in motion. Stay silent, and she might have time to gather actual proof rather than suspicions and circumstantial evidence. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you're clever," Drago repeated. "Clever enough to understand that everyone's survival depends on you making the right choices. Your husband is descending into brutality that will eventually destroy him. The organization needs stable leadership. You want your children safe." He paused meaningfully. "Perhaps we could help each other. Once Corvino is no longer effective." The offer was clear: betray her husband, and Drago would spare her and the twins. Refuse, and she'd remain a target. "I need to think," Thessaly managed. "Of course, but don't think too long. Things are already in motion that can't be stopped, only redirected." Drago moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mrs. Stellato? I'd suggest not mentioning our conversation, for everyone's safety." When he left, Thessaly sat frozen, her hands pressed to her belly where the twins were kicking violently, as if sensing her terror. She was trapped between impossible choices: warn Corvino and risk immediate attack, or stay silent and try to outmaneuver the man who just revealed himself as the enemy within. Either way, The sanctuary had become the most dangerous place she could be. Chapter 6. The bodies started appearing 3 days later. Not Drago's doing this time, Corvino's. Thessaly watched from the estate windows as corpses were delivered to the front. Gates wrapped in plastic, messages to enemies she didn't know they had. Corvino was methodically eliminating not just threats but potential threats. Anyone connected to families that might theoretically pose danger. He'd stopped coming to bed. She'd find him in his study at all hours, surrounded by intelligence reports and photographs of targets, planning operations with a cold precision that left no room for mercy. "You need to sleep," she told him one night, 7 months pregnant now, her body heavy and uncomfortable. The twins were constantly active, pressing against her ribs and bladder with equal vigor. "I need to finish this," Corvino replied without looking up from the map spread across his desk. Red marks indicated completed eliminations. Blue marks showed remaining targets. There were dozens of blue marks. Finish what? Killing everyone in southern Italy? That got his attention. He looked up, and Thessaly barely recognized him. The man she'd married had been controlled, dangerous, but measured. This version was gaunt, hollow-eyed, with the feverish intensity of someone who'd stopped sleeping, probably stopped eating properly. "If that's what it takes," he said flatly. "Corvino, they wanted war, Thessaly. They threatened you. They threatened our children." His hand slammed down on the desk. "So I'm giving them war. Total war. When I'm done, there won't be anyone left who's stupid enough to even think about touching my family." "At what cost?" "Any cost." Thessaly moved closer despite her instinct to retreat from the stranger wearing her husband's face. "You're losing yourself. This isn't strategic anymore. It's obsession. It's protection. It's madness. You're creating more enemies with every body you stack up. More reasons for retaliation." Corvino stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "What would you have me do? Sit idle while threats gather? Show weakness so they know they can strike without consequences? I'd have you be smart instead of brutal." Her voice rose despite her attempt at control. "You're playing into exactly what someone wants, losing focus, becoming reckless. Someone like who?" His eyes narrowed dangerously. This was it, the moment to tell him about Drago. But Thessaly hesitated. She had suspicions, circumstantial evidence, and one ambiguous conversation. If she was wrong, she'd destroy a crucial alliance. If she was right, but Corvino investigated too obviously, Drago might strike immediately. "Like whoever benefits from you being distracted and violent," she said carefully. "Everyone I'm eliminating benefits from me being distracted. That's why I'm eliminating them. You're not listening. No, you're not understanding." Corvino crossed to her, his hands gripping her shoulders with barely controlled intensity. "You are my weakness. You and those babies. You're the only thing in this world that can destroy me. So I have to be willing to destroy everything else first. That's not protection, that's paranoia." His hands dropped, maybe. But paranoid people survive. They also become monsters. The word hung between them. Monster. The thing she'd feared he was becoming, now named explicitly. Corvino's expression shuddered completely. "If becoming a monster keeps you alive, then that's what I'll be." "And what happens after?" Thessaly pressed. "When the babies are born and you've killed everyone you can think of? What then? Do you just keep killing forever? If necessary. That's not a life. It's the only one I know how to give you." The admission hung raw between them. Thessaly saw then what she'd missed in her fear. Corvino wasn't just protecting her. He was drowning, overwhelmed by a responsibility he didn't know how to handle, except through the only methods he'd ever learned, violence and elimination. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly. "I have to be. It's the only way to keep you safe." "That's not," she began, but stopped as cramping pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, one hand flying to her belly. Corvino was beside her instantly, terror replacing the cold fury. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. Pain." Another cramp hit, sharper this time. Thessaly felt moisture between her legs and looked down to see fluid soaking through her dress. "Get the doctor," Corvino shouted toward the door where guards were already moving. "Now." He scooped Thessaly up despite her size, carrying her toward the bed. "Stay with me. The babies are fine, you're all fine." But his face showed the same truth Thessaly felt in her body. Something was wrong. It was too early. She was only 30 weeks along. Twins born this prematurely faced serious risks. The doctor arrived within 10 minutes, having been kept on standby at the estate for precisely this kind of emergency. He examined Thessaly quickly, his expression grave. "Your cervix is dilating. The babies are coming. Stop it," Corvino ordered, as if labor could be commanded to cease. "I can try to slow it with medication, but at this point, try. Do whatever it takes." The next hours blurred into pain and medication, and Corvino's hand gripping hers so tightly she thought bones might break. The doctor managed to stop active labor, but Thessaly remained on strict bed rest with the warning that the twins could come at any time. "This is stress-induced," the doctor told Corvino privately, though Thessaly heard through the door. "She needs calm, peace. This environment is dangerous for her and the babies." When Corvino returned to the bedroom, he looked 10 years older. "I'm destroying you," he said quietly, sitting beside the bed. "Trying to protect you, and I'm killing you anyway." "You're trying too hard," Thessaly replied, exhausted. "Doing too much. Alone. I don't know how else to be." She took his hand, the one that had held hers through the scare. "You wanted a wife. You got a partner. Now you have to actually let me be one." "By doing what? Letting you into the ugliness? I'm already in it. The question is whether we handle it together or whether you keep destroying yourself trying to shoulder everything alone." Corvino was quiet for a long moment. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you have me anyway." She squeezed his hand. "So work with me, not just for me. Even if it means showing you things that make you hate me. I've already seen things that should make me hate you. I'm still here." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers in the gesture that had become theirs. "You wanted a husband. You got a killer. Now you get to live with both." The words were harsh, but Thessaly heard the question beneath them. Could she really accept who he was? All of him, not just the parts that protected her, but the parts that enjoyed the violence, that found purpose in the brutality? "I know what I signed up for," she said, though neither of them believed that was entirely true. What she didn't say, what she couldn't yet, was that the real monster might not be her husband at all, but the man standing guard outside their door right now, waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. And she still didn't know how to stop him, without triggering the very catastrophe she was trying to prevent. Chapter 7. The twins were getting stronger, pressing against Thessaly's ribs with increasing vigor as she entered her 32nd week. The pregnancy complications had stabilized, but bed rest remained mandatory, which gave her far too much time to think, to watch, to piece together the puzzle of Drago's betrayal. She couldn't investigate openly anymore, not after he'd caught her in the security office. But Thessaly had spent 20 years as a financial consultant, which meant she knew how to read between lines and find patterns in seemingly innocuous data. From her bed, she requested files under the guise of helping Corvino with legitimate business operations. What she discovered confirmed her worst fears. Every attack, every escalation over the past 4 months traced back to intelligence Drago had provided or operations he'd overseen. The Russo family assault had been particularly damning. Drago had personally arranged the security rotation that night, citing a supposed credible threat from the east that required reinforcements away from the dining room windows. But the evidence remained circumstantial. Clever enough to create doubt, but not prove guilt. Drago had been careful, always maintaining plausible deniability. Thessaly was reviewing shipping manifests when her door opened without warning. She looked up to find Drago entering, closing the door behind him with deliberate casualness. "You shouldn't be in here," she said, her hand moving instinctively to the panic button Corvino had installed beside her bed. "I disconnected it this morning during the security check," Drago replied pleasantly. "Don't worry. No one will interrupt us." Terror flooded cold through Thessaly's veins. She was 8 months pregnant, bedridden, and completely vulnerable. Corvino was in Naples for meetings that, she realized with sickening clarity, Drago had probably arranged specifically to get him away from the estate. "What do you want?" She kept her voice level despite her racing heart. "To give you one more chance." Drago moved closer, pulling a chair beside her bed and sitting as if this were a friendly visit. "You've been digging, Thessaly, reviewing files, looking for patterns. You're smart. You've probably figured most of it out by now." "Figured what out?" "Don't insult us both by pretending." His smile was cold. "You know I've been orchestrating the threats, feeding Corvino information designed to make him increasingly paranoid and violent, turning him from a respected Don into a rabid dog that the Commission will have to put down." "The Commission?" Thessaly's mind raced, remembering fragments of conversations about the governing body that mediated between families. They're already discussing it. Corvino's brutality is destabilizing the entire region. He's eliminated 3 families in 4 months. Families with alliances, with territories that are now in chaos. Drago leaned back entirely at ease. "When the Commission moves against him, I'll be the logical successor. The steady underboss who tried to moderate his boss's extremes but couldn't stop the madness. And me? The twins? Unfortunate casualties of the Commission's action. Corvino D's defending his family. Very tragic, very noble, but necessary for stability." Drago's expression remained pleasant. "Unless you're reasonable." "Define reasonable." "You testify before the Commission that Corvino has become unstable, dangerous even to his own family. You request protection. I provide it, taking temporary control until the succession is formalized." He paused meaningfully. "The twins live. You live. Comfortably even. All you have to do is betray the man who's destroying himself trying to protect you." The cruelty of the choice made Thessaly want to scream. Drago had engineered everything perfectly, created a situation where Corvino's love for her had become the weapon destroying him, and where her only path to survival required completing that destruction. "How long do I have to decide?" "The Commission meets in 3 days. Corvino will be summoned to answer for the Russo family elimination and subsequent territorial chaos. If you're willing to cooperate, I'll arrange for you to testify remotely, too pregnant to travel safely." Very sympathetic. Drago stood. "If not, well, accidents happen, especially during premature labor. You'd kill a pregnant woman?" "I'd kill anyone to achieve my goals, but I'd prefer not to kill you. You're valuable as a symbol. The widow and orphans of a Don who went mad." His hand rested briefly on her belly, and Thessaly fought not to recoil. "Think carefully, Thessaly. You're clever enough to see which choice gives your children a future." After he left, Thessaly lay frozen, her hands pressed to where the twins were kicking frantically. She had 3 days to decide whether to save her husband or her children. 3 days to find a way out of a trap designed by someone who'd spent 8 years learning every aspect of Corvino's operation and vulnerabilities. She couldn't warn Corvino directly. Drago would be watching, listening. Any communication would be intercepted. But she wasn't helpless, even bedridden and pregnant. She had access to files, to financial systems, to the network of contacts her father had built before his death. Thessaly began making calls carefully, using the secure line Corvino had installed for her legitimate business work. She reached out to her father's old associates, people who'd operated in the gray areas between legal and illegal, who owed favors or could be bought. "I need information about commission protocols," she told one particularly well-connected lawyer. Specifically, what evidence they require to move against a sitting Don. The answer was both enlightening and terrifying. The commission required testimony from multiple sources: family members, business associates, evidence of instability that threatened the broader organization. Drago would need more than just Thessaly's testimony. He'd need corroboration, which meant he had other people positioned to testify against Corvino. People within the organization who were either loyal to Drago or had been manipulated into believing the Don had become dangerously unstable. Thessaly spent the next day identifying likely candidates. 3 of Corvino's capos had expressed concern about the recent violence. His consigliere, the traditional advisor, had been systematically excluded from decision-making as Corvino became more paranoid. Any of them could be convinced to speak against their boss if they believed it was for the family's survival. She needed to flip the script. If Drago's plan required multiple testimonies, she needed to undermine those testimonies before they happened. But how could she reach Corvino's men without Drago knowing? The answer came from an unexpected source: Maria, the estate's housekeeper who'd worked for the Stellato family for 30 years. She brought Thessaly dinner personally, a kindness she'd been showing since the pregnancy complications. "You look troubled, Mrs. Stellato," Maria said quietly, setting the tray beside the bed. Thessaly studied the older woman, making a calculated risk. "Maria, how loyal are you to this family?" "I raised the Don from a boy. I was here when his mother died, when his father was killed. This family is my family, even if helping me means going against the underboss." Maria's eyes sharpened. "Drago is not family. He is an employee who forgets his place." She sat down, lowering her voice. "What do you need?" Thessaly made her decision. "I need you to deliver messages to 3 people without Drago knowing. Can you do that?" "The Don should know if there's a threat." "The Don will know. But if I tell him directly, people die before we can prove anything. I need evidence, and I need 3 days." Thessaly met Maria's eyes. "Trust me." Maria nodded slowly. "Tell me what you need." Working through Maria, Thessaly reached Corvino's consigliere first. The old advisor had been pushed aside during the recent violence. His counsel ignored in favor of Drago's more aggressive recommendations. Thessaly's message was simple: review the intelligence reports from the past 4 months, specifically tracking which operations Drago had personally overseen. The second message went to Corvino's most trusted capo, a brutal man named Salvatore who'd been with the family since Corvino's father's time. She asked him to investigate Drago's financial holdings discreetly, using contacts outside the normal family channels. The third message was to Corvino himself, carefully worded to avoid triggering Drago's surveillance. "The commission meeting is a trap. Don't defend yourself. Let them make their case. Trust me." It was a gamble. Corvino's instinct would be to fight, to see the commission's summons as a challenge to his authority. But if Thessaly was right, if her investigation had uncovered what she thought it had, then letting Drago's plan unfold was the only way to expose it completely. On the third day, as Thessaly felt the first real contractions beginning, Maria returned with news. The consigliere found the patterns. "He's bringing evidence directly to the commission," she whispered. And Salvatore discovered Drago's offshore accounts, money from the Russo family, from 3 other organizations Drago claimed were threats. "Where's Corvino?" "On his way back from Naples. He received your message." Another contraction hit, stronger this time. Thessaly gasped, her water breaking in a warm rush. "Get the doctor," she managed. "And get me a phone. I need to call the commission directly." "Mrs. Stellato, you're in labor," which is exactly why they'll listen. "Get me the phone, Maria. Now." As contractions intensified, Thessaly made the most important call of her life. She reached the commission's mediator, a neutral party who facilitated hearings, and delivered her testimony, not about Corvino's instability, but about Drago's manipulation, about the pattern of intelligence designed to trigger violence, about the offshore accounts and the payments from families Drago had marked as threats. "You're testifying against your husband's underboss while in active labor?" the mediator asked, incredulous. "I'm testifying to save my husband's life and my children's future," Thessaly replied through gritted teeth. "And I have evidence to support every claim. Check your secure messages. My source is uploading files now." She hung up as another contraction crested, this one bringing blinding pain. The twins were coming, and they weren't waiting for anyone. Somewhere in the estate, Drago would be discovering that his carefully constructed trap was collapsing. Somewhere on the road from Naples, Corvino was racing home to a wife in labor, and a betrayal finally exposed. And Thessaly, caught between life and death as her body prepared to bring 2 new lives into their violent world, could only hope she'd been clever enough to outmaneuver the man who'd spent months orchestrating their destruction. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 8. Pain consumed everything. Thessaly's world had narrowed to the crushing pressure of contractions and the terrifying understanding that her babies were coming too early, too fast, in the middle of a conspiracy about to explode into violence. "Where's my husband?" She gasped between contractions as the doctor examined her. En route, 20 minutes out, Maria reported from the doorway. But Mrs. Stellato, there's a problem. Drago's ordered the gates sealed. He's saying it's a security protocol, but he's trapping us. Thessaly understood immediately. Drago knew the plan had failed, that evidence was reaching the commission. His only move now was to eliminate everyone who could testify against him and claim it was an attack by outside forces. Another contraction hit, so intense she couldn't breathe. The doctor's face grew concerned. The first baby is in distress. We need to move to the surgical suite. She may need an emergency cesarean, he said urgently. No. Thessaly grabbed his arm with surprising strength. We stay here. Drago controls the lower levels. This room has one entrance we can defend. Mrs. Stellato, I cannot deliver twins in these conditions. You'll have to. She turned to Maria. Lock the door, get whoever you trust with a gun stationed outside. Nobody enters except the Dawn. As Maria rushed to comply, Thessaly's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The commission has issued an emergency summons for Drago. His men are standing down, but he's not. 6 loyalists still armed in the compound. Corvino is 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. She had to survive for 5 minutes while her body tried to expel 2 premature infants. The door handle rattled. Mrs. Stellato, it's Dr. Greco. I need to check the babies, a male voice called. Her doctor was female. Thessaly met Maria's eyes and saw the housekeeper already reaching for the gun hidden in her apron. Wrong doctor, Thessaly called back, trying to keep her voice steady as another contraction built. Try again. Gunfire answered. The heavy bedroom door, reinforced when Corvino had upgraded security, held against the initial barrage. But Thessaly heard splintering wood. They were shooting through the hinges. The surgical suite, the doctor urged, pale with terror. There's a secondary exit. Into halls Drago controls. We hold here. Thessaly gripped the bedsheets as the contraction peaked. Through the pain, she felt something shift inside her. The first baby was coming, whether anyone was ready or not. The door crashed inward. Drago entered with 3 armed men, his expression cold fury. You couldn't just take the deal, he said, gun raised. You couldn't just be loyal, Thessaly shot back through gritted teeth. Where's the evidence you sent to the commission? Everywhere. Copies to 5 different sources. Killing me just confirms your guilt. Drago's gun didn't waver. Maybe. But dead people can't testify, and your body makes a compelling crime. Scene. The pregnant wife murdered by enemies while the Dawn was away. Except the commission already has my testimony. Already has the financial records. Already issued your summons. Thessaly fought through another wave of pain. You've lost, Drago. Then I have nothing left to lose. The gunshot seemed to happen in slow motion. Maria threw herself in front of Thessaly, taking the bullet meant for her mistress. The elderly woman crumpled, blood blooming across her chest. Thessaly screamed, rage and grief mixing with the physical agony of labor. Her body convulsed, and suddenly the doctor was shouting that the baby was crowning. That she needed to push right now regardless of the guns and violence. More gunfire erupted, but from the hallway this time. Corvino's voice roared commands, the sound of his return like thunder. Drago's men turned toward the new threat, giving the doctor precious seconds to work. Push, the doctor commanded. Thessaly pushed, her entire world narrowing to the impossible task of bringing life into a room filled with death. She heard Corvino's gun firing with methodical precision, heard bodies hitting the floor, heard her husband's voice getting closer. Again, the baby's coming. She pushed with everything she had. Pain beyond description, and then sudden relief as her first daughter slid into the doctor's waiting hands. The tiny cry that followed was the most beautiful sound Thessaly had ever heard. Corvino, she screamed, needing him to know, needing him to hear that their daughter had survived this nightmare. He appeared in the shattered doorway, covered in blood, guns still raised. His eyes found Thessaly on the bed, the doctor holding their newborn daughter, and something cracked in his expression. The second baby, the doctor urged. I need you to push again. But Drago wasn't finished. He emerged from behind an overturned dresser. gun aimed directly at the infant in the doctor's arms. "Drop your weapon or the baby dies," he said coldly. Corvino froze, the impossible choice paralyzing him. Thessaly saw it play across his face, the calculation, the horror, the desperation of a man whose entire identity was built on protection and control, now powerless to save his own child. "You wanted to be Dawn," Thessaly gasped, another contraction building. "This isn't how Dawns act. This is cowardice." "Shut up," Drago started. "You had 8 years to challenge him honorably. Instead, you hid behind manipulation and proxy violence. You're not worthy of leading anything." She met his eyes with pure contempt. "You're just a failure with a gun." The insult did exactly what she'd intended. Drago's attention shifted from the baby to her for one crucial second. Corvino moved with lethal speed, his shot taking Drago in the shoulder and spinning him around. The underboss's gun discharged wildly as he fell, the bullet slamming into the wall above Thessaly's head. Corvino fired twice more, center mass, and Drago collapsed without another word. Then Corvino was at her side, his bloodied hands cradling her face. "You're alive. The baby..." "Babies," Thessaly gasped. "Plural. The second one's coming now." He turned to the doctor, who was checking the first infant, their daughter, tiny but breathing, her cries growing stronger. "What do you need?" "Clean towels, boiling water. And pray the second baby tolerates delivery better than the first." The next 20 minutes were a blur of pain and terror and stubborn life refusing to quit. Thessaly pushed through exhaustion and blood loss, through the knowledge that Maria lay dead on the floor and Drago's men might still be in the compound. Finally, impossibly, her second daughter slid into the world. Smaller than the first, not crying immediately, terrifyingly silent. The doctor worked over her with practiced efficiency, clearing airways, stimulating response. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then a cough, a sputter, and the most precious sound. Another tiny cry joining her sister's. Corvino made a sound Thessaly had never heard from him, something between a sob and a laugh. He stood between the 2 bassinets the medical team had brought, his hands hovering over his daughters as if afraid to touch them, to believe they were real. "2 girls," he whispered. "2 girls," Thessaly confirmed, exhausted beyond measure. He looked at her then, really looked, seeing the blood and the trauma and the cost of what she'd done to save them all. "You testified against Drago. You solved it while in labor. I wasn't going to let him win." She reached for him, and he came immediately, kneeling beside the bed and pressing his forehead to hers in their familiar gesture. "Maria," he started, "died protecting me. Us." Tears finally came, the adrenaline fading into grief. "I'll honor her, make sure her family wants for nothing." His voice broke. "I almost lost you. All of you. I was so focused on external threats, I didn't see the one standing next to me every day. We survived," Thessaly said simply. "Because of you, not me." He pulled back to look at her. "You saved us, Thessaly. Your intelligence, your courage, you saved this family." Emergency medical teams were arriving, summoned by Corvino's men. The commission's representatives would follow. There would be questions. Testimony. The aftermath of Drago's failed coup to navigate. But in that moment, surrounded by violence and new life, Corvino lifted his first daughter carefully from her bassinet. Thessaly watched his massive hands that had killed a dozen men tonight, cradle the tiny infant with infinite gentleness. "What do we name them?" he asked quietly. "The first one should be Maria," Thessaly said, "for the woman who gave her life for ours. Maria Stellato." Corvino tested the name, nodding. "And the second?" Thessaly looked at her smaller daughter, the fighter who'd struggled into life even when everything suggested she wouldn't make it. "Vittoria. Victory. Maria and Vittoria." Something softened in Corvino's expression, something that looked almost like peace. 2 miracles born in blood. As the medical teams began cleaning the scene and stabilizing Thessaly for transport to a proper hospital, she watched her husband move between their daughters, learning how to hold them, how to touch them without fear. The monster was still there. She could see it in the way his eyes tracked. Threats. In the tension that never fully left his shoulders. But alongside the monster now existed something else. a father, terrified and awed in equal measure. They'd survived the betrayal, the violence, the impossible odds, but the real challenge was just beginning. Learning how to raise children in this world, how to give them normal lives while protecting them from the brutality that had nearly consumed their parents. Thessaly closed her eyes, listening to her daughter's cries, and prayed they'd both be strong enough for what came next. Chapter 9. The delivery room had been transformed into a fortress. Medical equipment mixed with armed guards, doctors working around security protocols that would have been absurd in any other context. But this was the Stellato family, and normal rules had never applied. Thessaly drifted in and out of consciousness, the exhaustion from delivery and blood loss pulling her under. Each time she surfaced, Corvino was there, sometimes holding a daughter, sometimes giving orders to the men securing the hospital, always within reach. The commission's representatives arrived 4 hours after the births. 3 men in expensive suits, their faces grave as they surveyed the aftermath of Drago's failed coup. Thessaly listened from her hospital bed as Corvino gave his account. His voice level and controlled, despite the babies sleeping in his arms. Your underboss attempted to orchestrate your removal through manipulation and violence, the lead representative summarized. Your wife provided evidence of his betrayal while in active labor. This is unprecedented. My wife saved my life and my family, Corvino said flatly. Drago is dead. His CO conspirators are being questioned. The threat is neutralized. The threat to you, perhaps. But Don Stellato, your actions over the past months, the elimination of the Russo family, the territorial aggressions, the body count, these cannot be ignored. The representative's eyes were hard. Drago may have manipulated the circumstances, but you chose the responses. I chose to protect what's mine. You chose violence that destabilized the entire region. The man gestured to the sleeping infants. We understand your motivations. But the commission exists to prevent exactly this kind of chaos. You will stand down from active operations for 6 months. Your consigliere will assume day-to-day leadership. You will submit weekly reports to ensure compliance. Thessaly watched Corvino's jaw tighten, saw the fury building. Before he could respond, she spoke. He accepts, she said clearly. Corvino's head snapped toward her. Thessaly, 6 months to focus on our daughters instead of vendettas. 6 months to heal instead of destroy. You accept? She held his eyes, willing him to understand. The commission representatives looked between them. The decision is the Dawn's, one said. The decision, Corvino said slowly, never breaking eye contact with Thessaly, is my family's. If my wife says we need 6 months, then we take it. The representatives exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such easy compliance. Very well. We'll formalize the terms. Your consigliere will report directly to us during this period. After they left, Corvino carefully placed both daughters in their shared bassinet and came to Thessaly's bedside. You just forced me into retirement. I forced you into being present. There's a difference. She reached for his hand. You've spent 6 months becoming someone I barely recognize. Now you get 6 months to remember who you actually are. And if threats emerge during those 6 months, then your consigliere handles them, or you advise from a distance. But you don't get to use our daughters as excuses to become the monster anymore. Her voice softened. I need my husband back, Corvino. Not the Don, not the killer. The man who read Dante at 3 a.m. and talked about poetry. He was quiet for a long time. I don't know if that man exists anymore. Then figure it out. You have 6 months. She squeezed his hand. Do it for them, if not for me. The first weeks were chaos despite the forced retirement. The twins required round-the-clock care, their premature birth necessitating careful monitoring. Maria, little Maria, struggled with feeding and needed supplemental oxygen for the first 2 weeks. Vittoria was slightly stronger but still heartbreakingly tiny. Thessaly watched Corvino transform in unexpected ways. The man who'd killed without hesitation became terrified of holding his daughters too tightly. The Don who'd commanded hundreds of men became helpless before too. Infants who communicated only through cries he couldn't interpret. She won't stop crying, he said desperately one night at 2 a.m., pacing with Maria against his shoulder. She has gas. Try burping her again. I did. 3 times. Try a 4th. He did, and Maria released a tiny burp that seemed impossibly loud for such a small creature, then immediately settled into sleep. Corvino stared at his daughter with the same expression he'd worn after. Particularly successful business deals, triumph mixed with disbelief. I killed 6 men today in my head, he admitted quietly, settling into the chair beside Thessaly's bed. Old habits. Someone cut me off in traffic, and my first thought was elimination. But you didn't actually kill them. No. But I wanted to. The impulse is still there. He looked at Maria sleeping in his arms. What if I can't control it? What if they inherit this from me? They'll inherit your strength and your intelligence. What they do with it is their choice, not your fate. You sound very certain. I have to be. For them? Thessaly watched Vittoria sleeping in the bassinet beside her bed. We chose this life, Corvino. They didn't. The least we can do is make sure they have actual choices. As weeks turned into months, patterns emerged. Corvino discovered an unexpected aptitude for midnight feedings and diaper changes. He built an elaborate security system around the nursery, but gradually reduced it as the commission's oversight proved effective. No attacks materialized, no threats emerged that weren't handled by his consigliere. The forced distance from operations frustrated him initially. Thessaly watched him pace during conference calls, clearly struggling not to override his consigliere's decisions. But gradually, she saw him relax into the role of advisor rather than dictator. Your call, he'd say when asked to make a final decision. I trust your judgment. It was revolutionary, this delegation of power. The organization didn't collapse without his direct control. In fact, several operations improved with the consigliere's more measured approach. At 4 months, the twins had caught up developmentally. Maria had overcome her feeding difficulties and was the more placid of the 2, content to observe the world with dark eyes that mirrored her father's. Vittoria was fierce from the beginning, demanding and loud, refusing to be ignored. This one is definitely yours, Corvino said one evening, attempting to soothe a screaming Vittoria. She's ours, Thessaly corrected, but she smiled. Vittoria had her stubbornness, the refusal to accept limitations. The 6-month mark arrived with surprising speed. The commission scheduled a review meeting to assess whether Corvino could resume full operations. Thessaly watched him prepare, noted how he moved differently now. Still dangerous. Still commanding, but with edges softened by months of enforced domesticity. What will you tell them? She asked the night before the meeting. That I'm ready to resume leadership. Are you? He was quiet, considering. I don't know. Part of me wants the power back. The control. He looked at their daughters, now sleeping peacefully in their cribs. But part of me dreads it. These 6 months, they've been the most terrifying of my life. But also, what? Also the most human I've felt in decades. He turned to her. I forgot what it's like to care about something other than power and survival. To have reasons to live beyond just not dying. You could step down, Thessaly suggested quietly. Actually retire. Let your consigliere take over permanently. And do what? I'm not exactly suited for civilian life. You're suited for whatever you decide to be suited for. She stood, crossing to him. The question is what you want, not what you've always done. The commission meeting was held at the estate, a courtesy that acknowledged Corvino's cooperation during the probationary period. The same 3 representatives reviewed reports, interviewed his consigliere, assessed the organization's stability. Finally, they addressed Corvino directly. You've complied with all conditions. Your organization is stable, profitable, and operating within acceptable parameters. The commission is prepared to lift restrictions and return full authority. On the condition, the lead representative added, that you maintain the operational oversight structures you've developed. The measured approach has been beneficial for all parties. Corvino nodded slowly. I have a counter-proposal. The representatives exchanged glances. We're listening. I want to maintain the current structure permanently. My consigliere runs day-to-day operations. I serve as chairman. Strategic decisions, major negotiations, but not tactical operations. He paused. I have 2 daughters who need a father more than my organization needs a dictator. Thessaly felt her breath catch. She hadn't expected this, hadn't dared hope he'd choose this path. "This is highly unusual," one representative said. "So is a Don surviving his underboss's coup because his wife solved it while giving birth," Corvino replied dryly. "Unusual seems to be our specialty." The commission representatives retired to discuss. 20 minutes later, they returned. "The commission accepts your proposal. You'll maintain title and final authority, but operational control transitions to your consigliere. We'll review again in 1 year." After they left, Thessaly found Corvino in the nursery, standing between the cribs where Maria and Vittoria slept. She moved beside him, and he immediately pulled her close. "I chose wrong before," he said quietly. "I thought protecting you meant destroying everything else. But real protection means being here, being present, being someone they can trust, not fear. You're learning." "I'm trying." He looked down at her. "You asked me months ago whether it gets easier, the things I do. The truth is, it doesn't. But having reasons to stop, that makes it possible to actually stop." "You're not stopping entirely," Thessaly pointed out. "No. But I'm choosing differently. Choosing them," he gestured to the twins. "Choosing us." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The darkness hadn't vanished from Corvino's eyes, and Thessaly knew he was still capable of terrible violence when necessary. The organization still operated in shadows, still generated wealth through morally questionable means. But in the nursery, with his daughters breathing softly and his wife beside him, Corvino found something he'd never thought possible, a reason to be more than the monster circumstances had created. "They'll grow up knowing what we are," Thessaly said, voicing the fear they both carried. "Yes, but they'll also grow up knowing we chose to be better for them. That we tried." Corvino reached down, adjusting Vittoria's blanket with the gentle precision he developed over months of practice. "It's not redemption, but maybe it's enough." "Maybe," Thessaly agreed. As they stood together in the soft glow of the nursery nightlight, surrounded by the evidence of their most unexpected alliance, neither could predict what the future held. Whether Corvino's transformation would last, whether their daughters would embrace or reject their legacy, whether the violence that had brought them together would eventually tear them apart. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. They had Maria and Vittoria. They had survived the impossible and carved out space for something resembling family from the brutality of their world. The struggle between monster and man would continue, but at least now Corvino had reasons to fight for the man. And Thessaly, who'd married a Don expecting nothing more than an alliance, had discovered something far more dangerous and precious: hope. "Thank you so much for sticking around and showing me so much love and support. You have no idea how much it means to me. If this story resonated with you, then hit that subscribe and like button right now.